Hello, Jennifer. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Jen. Happy Friday. Oh, we don't get to do these on Fridays very often. How was your week?
um, it's just another week in October as we inch closer to some significant activities in our country. So
a date that shall not be named.
Yeah.
With he who shall not be named.
With he who shall not be named. Oh, what times? Yes, the last debate was last night. So just to ground all of us, some of us made it through, some of us did not. Yeah. Right, Gerry?
That is right. Turned it off. Couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, at least we can start our Friday morning having a lovely conversation with Gerry Valentine. Hey, Gerry.
Hey,
Hi there.
Welcome.
Hey, guys. Happy Friday. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think this is great. I feel like I have such a passion for topics around adversity and diversity, and collectively the two of you are experts on both of those things, which I love so much. So, Gerry, can we just start with you kind of giving a little overview for folks of, what it is that you do and, and how turning adversity into an advantage kind of came to be?
Sure. So my business is Vision Executive Coaching, and I bill myself, I'm a public speaker. I'm a business advisor, I'm an executive coach, and I am now an author. I'm coming out with my first book, which we will talk about a little bit more. So I work with entrepreneurs, I work with high potential professionals, I work with corporate executives, and the center of gravity of my coaching practice has often been helping people overcome some type of adversity. It might be a new job, it might be starting a company, it might be a critical point in their career, something. Prior to starting my company, I spent almost 27 years, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze, sorry.
Bless you.
Sorry, sorry guys, I felt that coming on. I tried to resist it and it just wasn't gonna happen. Prior to starting my company, I spent 27 years in the high-end Fortune 100 world. I worked for companies like American Express and Pfizer Inc. and Columbia House, for those of us who are old enough to still remember Columbia House and CDs in the mail.
Yeah.
And much that corporate background is a big part of what I use in supporting my clients in my executive coaching practice. But the thing I always tell people is that my pedigree doesn't actually reflect who I am and where I came from. Because if you read my bio, you don't read that I grew up actually in a very poor neighborhood in New York City of the 1970s, which was a time of urban decay. It was a time when New York City almost went bankrupt, when there was crime, there was all kinds of stuff. I was the son of a single mother, and we really struggled financially. And I left the neighborhood I grew up in to earn an Ivy League degree, to earn an M.B.A, and then to launch off into a very different life. If you were to read the statistics, you would see that an African-American man born into the circumstances I was has about a 6% probability of living the life that I now live. So they're really kind of stark statistics. And one of the things I realized soon after starting my coaching practice was that the thing that I had always been great at in my corporate career was overcoming some type of adversity, overcoming some type of disruption. It was something I was good at leading my teams through. It was something I was good at teaching people who reported to me to do. And I realized that it's actually the center of gravity in my coaching practice too. So it's the thing that people come to me for, that in one way or another, I'm always working with clients on. And that's what led me to write a book. That's what led me to do a TED Talk. And I've realized, okay, this has been the message all along. And my book is about the tools that I have learned to overcome adversity, to live through disruption. And it just so happens that I am launching this book during global pandemic. Who knew?
Good timing.
Yeah.
Hey, what are you going to do?
You didn't plan it this way, but
did not.
But you wrote something that was ahead of its time. That's how I like to think about it, right?
Exactly. As Jen knows, I started work on this about 2 years ago, which my first book, and the journey into writing has been a fascinating one for me too, because if you'd spoken to me 5 years ago, I would never have thought that I'd be writing a book. And there were certain things about overcoming adversity and disruption that were actually part of the writing process. And and some of those actually made it into the book. One of the stories I tell in the book, which I have not been public about until the last 5 years, is I have dyslexia. And for a long time, I thought that having dyslexia meant that you could not be a good writer, and certainly you would not enjoy writing. When I started writing as really a support to my business, it was possibly one of the biggest surprises to me in the world that A, I enjoy it, and B, I'm really reasonably good at it, which meant reassessing a story that I had always told myself. And that's one of the tools for overcoming adversity, for turning adversity into advantage. It's kind of interrogating some of those stories that we tell ourselves and learning where there may be an advantage on the other side of that adversity.
That's such goodness.
That's excellent. Jenn, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So Gerry, for me, being LGBTQ plus, realizing as I came out that I was entering a community that it was extremely disadvantaged, but also having all the privileges of my background, which was super different than yours. We had different paths, but I do think about the experience of coming out for me was an important liberation point as a woman in my culture. It was really a huge watershed of finding my voice, discovering my resilience, discarding a script because there really wasn't a script for me,
right?
And really writing it myself. And the level of agency especially for a woman is so powerful to say, this is going to be my life. This is who I'm going to love. This is how I'm going to make a living because there's no one to rely on. And it just, Jenn, I know you relate to this too. It comes back to us, but the gift in that was so unexpected and has really allowed me to forge a truer path for me that I'm so grateful for. And it was all, I think, stemmed from who I fell in love with, and then following that path and realizing that I was part of this other community and all the resilience in that community, all the courage, all the bravery, all the rewriting of scripts, all of the forging that we do in this community for our truth, for our authenticity. So I just think that it's something I'm so deeply grateful for. And yet you talk about something that's viewed as deeply stigmatized. So it's just a really interesting thing.
Exactly. So as I mentioned, a lot of my work is in the corporate world and also in the startup world. And I think that people who come from marginalized communities, and there are many of us, whether they are women, whether they're members of the LGBTQ plus community, I too identify as a gay man, whether they're minorities, whatever backgrounds we may come from, or maybe an intersection of different backgrounds, though the people who have been able to make that journey and overcome those obstacles have special talents that they bring to the corporate world, to the business world. I don't do DE&I work in particular. However, I believe very strongly that companies do themselves a disservice by not having underrepresented people at the table, because it is our experiences that, I would say I have been living through disruptive times my entire life. So this is actually, it's the first global pandemic I've lived through. But in a lot of ways, it's not really that different than growing up as a single mother in 1970s New York, where we really worried, can we really pay the mortgage this month? Right. Or is this, going to be the month where we end up on the streets? So the types of tools you use to get past that are very, very, very similar. And this point you mentioned about being forced to write your own script, it's important, because once you write your own script once, you learn that you can, and you can do it again and again and again and again. And something else that I will bring up, this is kind of an inclusive concept, because everybody is going to face some type of disruption or adversity in their lives, no matter who you are. And I think that one of the things I talk about in my book is that we as a country and we as a world community are living through disruptive times. One of the things I focus on is the economic disruption that we're going through. So we're at a time where I call it a fourth industrial revolution, where we are catapulting forward in the types of skills that are important, that are valued. So we've moved into what I call a learning economy, which is a time when your ability to quickly learn and assimilate new information is what makes you valuable. We're entering this period at the same time that educational achievement in the United States is falling well behind that of other developed nations. That's a disruption, that's a dissonance. And some of the discourse that we see, I think more broadly right now, it's in the election, it's kind of everywhere, is what do we do? So we have large portions of the American population that are being left behind because they do not have skill sets that are valuable in the year 2021. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with that? That is a disruption. And I think it takes this collective ability in business leaders, in individuals, in government leaders and policymakers to think about how do we turn that adversity into advantage? How do we use those tools such that we can turn this type of disruption into a place where we can thrive?
And now, is your book written for the everyday person, that they can kind of pick this up and gain that new skill set of how to really kind of take this thing that's happened to them and use that as fuel for something better in their lives?
Exactly. My book is written for the everyday person. And Jen, that's a really great comment, because when I started out 2 years ago, I was going to write a business book, because that's my background. That's the area where I feel comfortable. And also, like, when you write a business book, you get to keep up certain shields. You don't need to get that personal in the book. And one of the things I talk about, a way to overcome adversity, a way to turn disruption into an advantage, is to leverage something that I call social capital. Those are the people that we're connected with, because it's the people that we choose to connect ourselves to who help elevate our thinking, who help us come up with new ideas. Mm-hmm. And so true to my own teachings, when I had my book concept down and I had like maybe a 5-page outline of what the book was going to be, I sent it off to about a dozen people in my network. And there were some variants in the types of people I sent it to, and where they're all people I deeply respected. And they kind of uniformly came back with a feedback. So, Gerry, this sounds great, but please don't write another boring business book. Like, nobody needs another boring business book. It feels like there's something truer here that you need to talk about. So at that point, it pivoted from a business book to a book for everyone. And it was a really interesting soul-searching process, because what the process of writing the book became was thinking about some of these principles that I use in business, but I also tell people in everyday life, and going deep into how did I learn that? Like, how did I learn the fact that social capital is critical for thriving in disruptive times? Like, where did I learn that? What was the life experience that taught me that? And so the book became a series of experiences, sometimes business experiences, but more often personal experiences, and sometimes deeply personal stories about how I learned these things, and then how these things pivot into broader life, maybe business, maybe societal leaders, what have you. So it is actually a book written for everyone that started out as a business book, that my network of social capital begged me not to write another business book.
And I think, go ahead, Jen.
You go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think so many people are going to benefit from that by having made that pivot. So those were very sage advisors to you.
They were really helpful. They were great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, what you're doing, Gerry, what you're doing is mining your own like what you learn from having to navigate your own identity in those spaces, that I think is the wisdom that is a business book, because your experience and my experience and Jenn's of forging the way actually has truths in it that need to be learned by everyone else, not just us.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So, and the workplace needs to change and shape around more of us. Like I always say the workplace wasn't built by and for like many of us, right? Us on this call.
The majority of us, actually.
Yeah, the majority of us. Exactly.
It was not built for the majority of us.
That's right. So, and that's what needs to fundamentally change. And that's the question I get a lot, which is, so Jennifer, where do we start? Like if we are now coming to understand this, which I feel like, you know, Gerry, you understand, like, I'm like, where have you been? Like, this has been true for a long time. You know, 50% of LGBTQ people are closeted at work, 50%. Mm-hmm. And that was a statistic from last year. So like, there's some serious problems in a workplace, not of belonging for, you know, that one population. And then we can, you know, broaden it out to, you know, Black and brown experience in the workplace that's white dominated and all that fun stuff, which you know well.
Mm-hmm. I know well.
Yes. So I do think, though, that we are talk about forging a new understanding of what would a workplace look like that is built by and for more of us or all of us. I mean, can we imagine that sort of tantalizing possibility? And so fundamentally, it is a business book in a way, because understanding your experience and how you turned adversity into the gifts and the resilience, and same with me and Jenn. I think there's like, I often feel like, I don't know about you, but that my books reach a wider audience than just my tribe or my choir, but there's like gold in our journey for a sort of mass population. And that's why we need more storytellers like us, you know, that identify as an outsider, because if we can make sense of it, like that's lessons for everybody.
That's it. Exactly. And that was one of the techniques I tried to use in writing, was to think about first deeply, why is this a truth that I understand? And then how does this truth have universal relevance? So I believe that every truth, or I call them tools for thriving in a disruptive world. Every tool that I explain in the book is relevant for me. It's relevant for you as women. It's relevant for straight white men. It's relevant, broadly relevant. And my goal as an author was to understand these tools, to make them to make them accessible, and then to make them broadly useful. So one of the things I talk about in the beginning of the book, yes, this is a book that is appropriate for corporate leaders. This is a book that's appropriate for entrepreneurs. This is also a book that's appropriate for community leaders. This is also a book that is appropriate for parents who want to raise children who are able to thrive in a disruptive world. So my goal was to make it absolutely broadly relevant. There's something you remind me of, Jenn. So we talk about, you know, 50% of the LGBTQ community being closeted at work, which, you know, is shocking in this day and age, but still true. So I am a gay man of a certain age, shall we say. So I actually came out in the late 80s. And mid to late 80s. And that, you know, that was a very, very, very different time. And I have, you know, selecting a companies, even though I was working for major companies, where I could be reasonably safe being out, not completely safe being out, but reasonably safe being out, was an important thing for me. But I will tell you, one of the stories I talk about in the book was very early in my career, you know, when I was very junior, and actually like really needed the job because I was junior African-American man, like first generation going to college, let alone grad school in my immediate family. So like nobody in my family had ever worked at, you know, corporate level. So I knew nothing coming in. I also had a mountain of educational debt coming into this. Early in my career, I ended up with a boss at a company that I won't name, but who was a tremendous bully. And it was a culture that supported that kind of bullying. One of the things that this person did was spread, after I ended up getting really sick at work because I was working too long. One of the things this person did early on was spread a rumor that I had AIDS. So now let's think about that for a moment. So I did not, but the more important thing, which I talk about in the book, is like, suppose I had been facing a life-threatening illness.
Yeah.
And then you have this person spreading a rumor like that, and there was nothing I could prove. And at that time, even if I could prove, there's nothing I could do about it. But that's the kind of thing that, you know, people from marginalized backgrounds face in the workplace all the time. It's not like just the blatant stuff. It's the really insidious stuff. But, you know, there's a flip side to that story, and that's what I go to in the book. You know, there was a lot I learned from that experience, and there was a lot I learned about, all right, how you, this may be the worst person you ever deal with, and that person did turn out to be the worst person I ever dealt with as a boss, fortunately. But how do you, in dealing with someone like this, pivot and thrive through that type of disruption when you really need to? Like, you know, quitting my job was not an option. That was, there were many things that was not on the table. So everybody is going to, at some point in their career, face a suboptimal boss. So there were things that the lessons I learned through that experience were learned through a very difficult experience, but they are broadly applicable.
And there's something so powerful about taking those experiences that have been horrible in different settings and scenarios throughout the course of life, and to turn it into something that people can now read and learn from. Because I feel like, you know, the more I read just about AIDS and how it was handled, and because I feel like there's a lot of conversation lately talking about a global pandemic and comparing it to the AIDS crisis. And the more I learn about it, the more just absolutely gut-wrenching and heartbreaking it is. Like, I feel like any new piece of information I get is just so utterly tragic.
Yeah, let me tell you, it was a terrifying time. And that's from someone who was healthy. It was a terrifying time. It was an absolutely terrifying time. And, you know, there are lessons to be learned now that we're enduring another global pandemic. There was a really fascinating article that I would recommend. It's in New York Magazine. It is entitled Pandemics Change the Course of History. It is something like that. And the author looks back at pandemics to the 5th century. So looks at, provides historical context for what we're going through right now. And it is fascinating and really aligned with what I'm trying to say, because, you know, pandemics are terrible things. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic is horrible by modern standards, but it does not compare to some of the plagues prior in history, and the mortality rate does not compare. Our medical knowledge is much higher. And the author looks at both the negative changes, but also the positive societal changes that may have come out of those disasters. For example, the invention of the printing press. One of the things he speaks about is the fact that so many people died meant that you didn't have as many people to act as scribes. So it became really difficult to produce books, which means that the drop-off in population helped usher in the printing press, which completely changed modern history as a piece of information technology, meaning to disseminate information.
And so yes, all in this New Yorker article.
It's in New York Magazine. Yeah, I can send you the link when we get off this call. It is a really fascinating article. There's far more detail than this. He looks at the plague in the Roman Empire and what came out of it. So all that to say, you know, disruption is going to happen. And this is one of the things I talk about in the book. That's not a choice. We are all going to face disruption in our lives. This pandemic, when we get through it, there's going to be something else at the end. We have, you know, a smoldering, a friend of mine has referred to right now as the calm before the storm. We have a smoldering economic problem right behind the medical problem of this pandemic. I mean, as of last week, 8 million people in the United States had dropped into poverty. Wow. Food banks are reporting, record numbers of customers, many of whom have never gone to a food bank before. So that is an economic injury that is lurking right behind the health crisis that we have. And that's not going to go away. So, you know, and this is, when I talk about financial health and personal finance a great deal in the book as a tool to disruption. One of the things I speak about is that when people don't have sufficient financial health, they are forced into what I call decisions of desperation. Which means that you cannot, when faced with disruptive times, you can't make the optimal decision. If you have kids to feed at home, you can't necessarily go for that optimal job. You have to feed the kids. So those are decisions of desperation. And the problem is that decisions of desperation often have an unfortunate tail.
Yeah.
We are faced with the possibility of massive numbers of people needing to make decisions of desperation just to keep their lives together.
Yeah, there's, you know, Gerry, and we're already kind of coming up to our time. If I weren't the engine behind the publishing of your book, I would be so like on the edge of my seat intrigued right now of like, I need to get this book. So while we kind of pivot to wrap up, can you just tell people quickly how, like when your book's available, what the name is, and how to find you, generally speaking, on the internet?
Absolutely. So the name of my book is The Thriving Mindset: Tools for Empowerment in a Disruptive World. The book is coming out at the end of January, maybe early February. We're in the very final stages now. I am so excited. And by the way, I will say Publisher Purpose Press has been amazing. They have been taking me through this process. Like, cannot say enough good things about Jenn and her team. You can find me on the web at gerryvalentine.com. And that is Gerry with a G, GerryValentine.com. I do public speaking on this topic, and this topic of thriving through disruption, the thriving mindset, as you may have gathered, is a passion of mine. So it's stuff that I love to talk to people about. So get in touch. We can talk about it more.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gerry. This has been awesome.
This has been awesome.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been a wonderful experience. You guys are great. Have a great weekend, guys.
Thank you.
Talk to you both soon.
All right, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everyone.